fishing. So take it away, Sandra. Thank you very much, Sandra. That was lovely. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Westside Unitarian Universalist Church. Whether you are joining us on Zoom today, or no, not Zoom, YouTube, I'm sorry, real time, or whether you're watching at a later date, we welcome you. You are part of our congregation here today, and welcome to everybody who is here with us in the room in person. We're so glad to have you on this beautiful late winter day here in March in East Tennessee. We are a congregation at Westside who gather together to support each other and to support our local community and our wider community. And we also gather together to talk with each other about those important things in life, the meaning of life that we have found as we've gone through our journey, the spiritual truths that each of us have found hard-won through our experiences. We come together to share those things with the others around us in a respectful manner, and we like to hear what you've learned, and we like to share what we have learned. So if that sounds like the kind of thing you want to do, then you are welcome here in this congregation. So if you would take a look at your order of service, if you're here in the room with us, we have some announcements, and I'm going to draw attention to a couple of those. One is March 16th, which is a week today. We're going to have a luncheon, an intro to Westside. And anybody who is reasonably new to the congregation, who hasn't yet joined as a member, you're welcome to come along to that and to learn a little bit more about the church and what's involved in membership. And if you're a long-time member here at Westside, or even a medium-term member, you're also welcome to come along and talk to the people who are thinking of joining and share some of your experience of what it's like to be a member here. So on March 30th, we have our congregational meeting. Again, everybody is welcome to attend the congregational meeting, but you have to be have been a member for a certain amount of time in order to vote at the meeting, but everybody is welcome to attend and find out what that's all about. Okay, any other announcements for today? Okay, thank you very much. In that case, I'm going to invite our singing bowl to sound. The flaming chalice that we have here is the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. And at each service we light our chalice to bring us into the sacred space of our worship service. And we're going to do that today, and I have a reading to go with it. This reading is called The Hands of Our Fathers. And the words were written from the perspective of Jessica Starr Rockers. Perhaps her specific memories will elicit your own. She writes, "Every Sunday morning growing up, my father would take us to Mass at St. Peter's Catholic Church. I loved the hymns and the smells and the bells, as they say, but the sermons were kind of a bore. So I would occupy myself by counting the cuts, scrapes and bruises on my father's hands. My dad was an electrician and a farmer, working with his hands from before the sun came up until long after it went down. So every week I would take his large hands in my little ones, turning them over, examining, discovering the new bruises and keeping track of the healing of the old ones. I would count the wounds and whisper the tally in his ear. I loved that he let me hold and investigate his hands in this way. Snuggled up next to him in the pew in the quiet of the church with just the priest's voice in the background. Having two jobs that demanded his attention, my dad didn't always have time for such intimacies, except on a Sunday morning. I took pride in those wounds. It was evidence of how hard my dad worked to take care of his family. He was a man who was often uncomfortable with expressing affection, but I could see in those hands how much he loved me. Was my dad a good dad? Was he there for me when I needed him? Did he protect me and provide for me? Did he care about me? When I ask myself those questions, I think of his hands. We dedicate this chalice lighting today in honor of all the working hands and for all the ways, the hard workers, all the things they do for us to show how we are loved.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's good to see you all. If I haven't met you yet, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Reverend Carol Badeau. I'm privileged to serve here as minister. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. In addition to our chalice, we take a moment on Sunday mornings to light a couple of other candles to represent our community. And so one of those represents challenges, and one of those represents celebrations or things we're really happy about. And today Chris is going to light both of those for us in honor of International Women's Day, which was yesterday. We live in a world in which the place of women has changed dramatically over the last century. We can celebrate incredible things in women's lives, and also the work isn't done yet. There are still things that need to be done to bring the lives of women into balance and equity. After however many millennia of oppression of women. So let's just take a moment to honor the lives of women. I invite you to call to mind yourself if you happen to identify as a woman and you want to call yourself to mind, or any other woman that you know who is strong and brave and courageous and who has worked through her life to make the world a better, more equitable place. So as Sandra's music hinted at, and as Chris's cello sliding hinted at, today I'm going to be telling you some stories about life on the farm and talking a little bit about the joys and the contemporary challenges of farming in our culture. But before we do that, I'm going to invite the choir to come up. I know that some of you folks who were around in the 70s know this song. So you have to help, all right? You have to help. So the words to Thank God I'm a Country Boy are going to be up here. Now here's the thing about Thank God I'm a Country Boy. I was saying this to the choir earlier. It is less important that you get the words right than that you get the part, right? So what's going to happen is Lori's going to give us all a note to start with, and Yetta's going to give us a few starting strums on the guitar, and then we are all going to sing rhythmically and wholeheartedly whether we know the words or not. All right? All right, Lori, what's our note? Well, life on the farm is kinda laid back. Ain't much an old country boy like me can hack. It's early to rise, early in the sack. Thank God I'm a country boy. Well, a simple kind of life never did me no harm. Raising me a family and working on a farm. My days are all filled with an easy country charm. Thank God I'm a country boy. Well, I got me a fine wife, I got me old fiddle. When the sun's coming up, I got cakes on the griddle. Life ain't nothing but a funny, funny riddle. Thank God I'm a country boy. Well, the work's all done and the sun's setting low. I pull out my fiddle and I rosin up my bow. The kids are all asleep, so I keep it kinda low. Thank God I'm a country boy. I'd play Sally Gooden all day if I could, but the Lord and my wife wouldn't take it very good. I fiddle when I can and I work when I should. Thank God I'm a country boy. Well, I got me a fine wife, I got me old fiddle. When the sun's coming up, I got cakes on the griddle. Life ain't nothing but a funny, funny riddle. Thank God I'm a country boy. Now I wouldn't trade my life for diamonds or jewels. I never was one of them money-hungry fools. I'd rather have my fiddle and my farming tools. Thank God I'm a country boy. Yes, city folk driving in a black limousine. A lot of sad people thinking that's a mighty keen. Well, folks, let me tell you now exactly what I mean. Thank God I'm a country boy. Well, I got me a fine wife, I got me old fiddle. When the sun's coming up, I got cakes on the griddle. Life ain't nothing but a funny, funny riddle. Woohoo! Thank God I'm a country girl. Good job, you guys. So I could tell from that many of you have heard the song. Probably many of you have loved the song at some point in your life. That song was very popular for a long time. I learned it in like sixth grade choir. My sixth grade choir sang that song. So it's a song that was very popular during my childhood, and I grew up in farm country. I grew up in a tiny little town in the middle of Michigan farmland. And the song was sort of an important soundtrack in my head growing up. It encapsulates a really very much loved myth, a romanticization about farm life, about the golden agrarian lifestyle that is still pretty common today. But as any farmer will tell you, farm life is pretty hard. It is physically demanding, it is emotionally draining, and it is, in our current culture, financially almost impossible. It's not actually laid back. Like, life on the farm is kind of, no, it's not. Laid back is not what it is. So I will give you my trigger warning. Some of you know this already. About once a year, I preach a little bit of sermon about farming. And this is my once-a-year speech about contemporary agriculture. So, kind of buckle up for that. It's a story, contemporary farming is a story that is a lot of good news and a lot of bad news, all tumbled together. So despite having grown up around farms and farmers, and despite having this idea in my head that I knew a lot about farm life, the town I grew up in had one stoplight in the middle of town. Most of the kids I went to school with were farmers. We lived in town, but most of the kids I went to school with were farmers. I had a friend whose goats pulled her in a cart to her down the aisle for her wedding. Okay? I thought I understood farm life, but I was in for a massive shock when I moved to actually live on the farm. I had grown up playing in corn cribs. You're not going to have the opportunity, but never ever do that. It's a bad idea. I had watched baby piglets be born. I'd hung out in haylofts with barn kittens. I had spent time on farms. I was clueless about what it actually means to farm. My dad had left the farm when he married my mom because Mom was scared of livestock, and that wasn't going to work out. So he moved into town, and they moved into town, and he became an insurance agent. And I grew up in town and visited farms in my childhood. The first couple years on the farm I now live on with my husband taught me a lot. And one of the main things it taught me was that what I had imagined about farm living, and specifically about making a living from the land, was not the life of a farmer. My imaginations were about the life of landed gentry. And being landed gentry is very, very different from actual farming. John Denver, landed gentry. And his popular song reflects that. Landed gentry enjoy living on or near the land, open land, while getting their actual livelihood a step away from the land, either through some other financial vehicle, like a city job or investing in railroads or the stock market or whatever, or living on the land and having somebody else do the labor of making a living from the land. But farmers or homesteaders live in direct relationship with the land and survive from the land. They work the land they live to produce their food, their shelter, their heat, and sometimes even their clothing. So on our farm, we grow about 70 to 75% of our own food, or we get a very small amount from grocery stores. Dairy is still something we aren't raising ourselves yet. Or we get it from our neighbors, right? And we cut all our own wood off our land for heat. We build things that we need from the land. But I had no clue about any of that until I became a tenant farmer. Because we don't own the land we live on. Tracy's family, extended family, owns the land we live on. This was about 8 years ago, and the first couple years were bumpy, to say the least. this mythos, this confusion of actual farming with landed gentry, it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous in our culture. And it is central to both the romanticization of rural life and also the exodus away from sustainable agriculture and towards industrial farming. Young people do not want to do the hard work of farming. Younger generations are leaving the farm at alarming numbers because it is really hard work. So there's a corollary cultural movement. I'd like to ask a question about how many of you know what cottagecore is? Anybody know what cottagecore is? Here's what cottagecore is. Cottagecore is a new and very popular genre of literature and art that is rooted in a particular romanticization of rural life. How many of you are familiar with the fact that in our modern urban culture, lots of people want to go back to the farm? Lots of people want to go back to the country, okay? And cottagecore is an expression of that. And that's not really new. Cottagecore is just the most contemporary version of that in literature and art. I personally listen to cottagecore in my car when I'm driving to my job in the city. Because like most modern farmers and more modern farm families, farming by itself is economically unsustainable now. A family cannot make enough money on a farm to sustain themselves financially. Almost every farm family will tell you that somebody has to have a job in town in order to bring in enough money to subsidize farming. Okay? So I listen to cottagecore when I'm driving into the city. Thank God I'm a country boy, might make a wonderful soundtrack to a cottagecore novel, but the fact of the matter is, this is really interesting, most cottagecore novels are set in the British Isles, which really heightens that landed gentry thing, doesn't it? Really evokes that landed gentry thing. Now, the plot of these fictions basically goes like this, and this is very parallel to what's really happening around modern agriculture. So it goes like this. Disillusioned city boy or city girl or city person is forced by terrible financial or relationship circumstances to go back to the country, to the farm or the abbey or the rural village, and there they rediscover their true nature. They are freed from the falsities of city life. They fall in love and create an idyllic lifestyle for themselves. Now, here's the catch. One of the most important components of these stories is that someone, either the protagonist or their love interest, maybe a distant relative, is really, really wealthy. They got a lot of money. A lot of money is coming from somewhere, okay? And it's not coming from farming. Either the protagonist has accumulated a lot of wealth in their computer programming job in the city before they leave, or the protagonist meets someone who's incredibly wealthy doing something in town and they give it up to come and join them in the perfect country setting after they have saved a lot of money. The one I'm currently listening to was so ludicrous. Yesterday's plot twist was that £1 million appeared in the bank account. That hasn't happened to me yet. Okay, but why do I like it? Why do I like it? Probably because it gives me a break from the actual farm realities and allows me to wallow in that romantic mythos for a minute again. When I'm driving in my car on the way to my city job, I am free from mud, heat, extreme cold, depending on the season, the hard work, the bloody knees, the rats in the hallway, the skunks under the house, the fire ant stings, the spiny amaranth thorns, all of those things which are actually farming. When I'm going into town, I really just want to think about having a few sheep and a lovely house and a millionaire partner. That is not farming. So I have a soft spot in me for these romantic and unrealistic portrayals of rural life. But there are some popular illusions about living close to the land that I have personally had dispelled for me the hard way, and that it seems worth naming because they are actually harmful to all of us. They are harmful to our economy, and they are harmful to the land. So we're going to use the song as a way to talk about them. So the first one, life on the farm is kind of laid back. No. Life on the farm is not laid back. The myth is that farm life is somehow more relaxed or less stressful and more gentle than the hustle and bustle and stress and strain of city life. And this is presumably, the idea behind this myth is that it is because farm life is tuned to the clock of nature rather than to the man or the machine, right? And to some extent, I would argue that that is true. Farm life has a much more organic and natural pace, which is in some ways, on some days, less stressful than being in town. But that's not actually between, like, let's say May and October at all. Not during the peak growing season, it's not that way. But sometimes in the winter and what we call the shoulder seasons, the shoulder of the growing seasons, like late winter, early spring, and late fall, those seasons can be a little bit less hurried than life in town. The pace of farm life is not regulated by the human ego or by our ability to control things. Instead, on the farm, we are governed by our ecosystem. What we do depends on how high the wind is up, or how much cloud cover is out. How much rain did we have last week? Or how high have the peas gotten this week? Or have the onions died back yet? Are they ready to be harvested? Or nature controls our schedule. One of the funniest things that happens in our household is on any given morning when we're sitting at the table for breakfast and we start talking about the schedule, and I'm like, I've got my calendar. My city calendar is scheduled out 9 months in advance. Tracy's schedule goes out, his actual practical day-to-day life. He's got hopes and aspirations based on extensive crop planning, but what he can do on any given day, he won't know until that day. That's simple. And even more important than sort of the twists and turns of the weather and nature, one of the things that's really important on the farm life is whatever unexpected emergency is going to arrive. Now remember, if you're in town, a lot of the emergencies that arrive, you're going to have somebody in town deal with them for you. You're going to call somebody, they're going to come fix it or deal with it. But that's not true on the farm. So when the washing machine breaks, Tracy takes it apart to find out if it's fixable. Or maybe the bull, this has happened multiple times in recent weeks because it's that season, the bull has broken through a fence to get to the neighbor's cows who are in heat. That happens. So you got to go retrieve the bull, and you got to fix the fence, so all your plans for the day turn into fence mending. Or maybe the wind got up last week and a tree came down, and you got to saw the tree up. You got to go out with the chainsaw, and you got to saw the tree up, and then you got to move it, and then you got to rebuild the fence it fell on. Whatever it is. A bolt flies from the tractor, and you got to repair the tractor. These are the things that you deal with yourself immediately right now. So the image of a farmer, this is this picture I had in my head as a child. You see the image of the farmer with his hat off, and he's got a piece of straw in his teeth, and he's laying out there in the sun in the pasture, taking I have never, ever seen anyone take a nap in the collapse in the pasture. Yes. Yes. I have seen that. I have seen me and Tracy, after 2 or 3 hours, putting in seedlings one at a time down in the dirt, laying in the dirt, trying to get our backs to recover enough to do the next couple hours, but not just going out to take a nap. Doesn't happen. So farming is extremely physically demanding. It puts intense stress on our bodies and our psyches. In the summer, Tracy and I work from sunrise until well after sunset every day of the week. Sometimes in the summer, I will come into town, like on a typical Sunday, I'll come into town and I'll put in about 8 hours at the church, and then I will go home and work another 8 out on the farm until well after the sun sets. We take breaks in the heat of the day when we can, but summer still means about 15 to 16 hour days. from about May till October. November to April is slightly better, so those are our easy months, 9-hour days, 10-hour days. Okay? And anyone who lives on a farm will tell you there's never a day that you don't have a billion things to do. Anybody know what the concept of Sabbath is? Okay, Sabbath, the concept of Sabbath is sort of an enforced day off. It was farm people who invented the idea of Sabbath. Because in an agrarian culture, you had to consciously and actively choose to take a day where you didn't work yourself to the bone all day long. So agrarian cultures created this idea of Sabbath where at least from sunset of one day through the next sunset till the next morning, you couldn't work. You had to attend to other things. But here's the catch. I know some of you are like, why would anybody do this? Because it is the best, most rewarding, most incredibly amazing, healthy lifestyle I can possibly imagine. Neither one of us, Tracy nor I, would trade it for anything. The idea of leaving the farm to us is horrifying. I would argue this: while trying to make a farm financially viable in an urban economy is really hard and really stressful and kind of horrible, actual farm labor is a healthy kind of stress that for people who are made for it makes you thrive. For us, farm stress is the kind of stress that makes our bodies and our minds and our hearts stronger and more integrated. We feel deeply a part of the world in which we live, which right now is a really nice thing to have, right? Our sense of what's going on in the world is very different than what's happening for many people in the city. So let me tell you about my absolute favorite farm job: digging potatoes. Anybody here ever dug potatoes? Okay, awesome. On our farm, potato digging is partly mechanized. On big, huge industrial potato farms, it's totally mechanized, but in order to make it that way, they have to use a lot of chemicals. So, did you actually know, I just learned this last week, that the potatoes we buy in the store are actually sprayed with chemicals in storage to keep them from sprouting? So when you eat them, they're sprayed with stuff to keep them from sprouting. I just learned that last week. Anyway, our potatoes don't have that. Our potatoes are grown organically and sustainably. Now, in the past, we have planted as much as 300 to 400 pounds of seed potato. So what that means is you get 300 pounds of potatoes and you cut them into little pieces, which takes a few days, so that each little piece has an eye, and then you plow up lines in the dirt and you drop them in. You got to make sure the eye's sticking up, and then you cover them up. 300 pounds of seed potato will yield about 3,000 pounds of potato for the harvest, which we harvest almost entirely by hand. So that 3,000 pounder, not last summer, but the summer before, that took about 8 days. Okay, and here's how it works. So it takes about 9 hours a day. This is in mid-July, so you know what it's like in mid-July, right? It's toasty out there. So we work about 8 to 9 hours per day for a little over a week in the field, in the heat. And yes, it is absolutely my favorite job on the farm. So what happens is Tracy drives the tractor with a potato plow that pushes them up to the surface of the soil, and then I and whatever poor paid farm worker, which it's almost impossible to get. It's almost impossible to pay people to help you on a farm. We have tried. Our last experiment in getting people to help us involved hiring a couple of strapping young high school seniors who worked for 3 hours, and then Tracy found them sitting on the front porch drinking sodas, and they said, "We can't, we're not, that's it, we're out," and they left. So we occasionally are able to get someone to help us with the potato harvest, but not very often. Sometimes we get unwitting adult children to say, "Sure, we'll come help." And then they sit in the shade, again, drinking soda. Well, not our version of sodas, they're organic. They sit there and they're dying in the heat, right? So generally I crawl along behind the potato plow with 5-gallon buckets. and you pick the potatoes up and you put them in the bucket for about 3 hours, and then you take a lunch break and 3 more hours and 3 more hours, and you do that for days, and it's about 95 out. And what that means is also you're crawling along and digging through the dirt with your hands. You're alternating a few experiences. The sweat bees are stinging you on your back, which when the fire ants sting your hands, you forget about. And then when the bee stings your back again, you forget about the fire ant stings on your hands and knees. And every once in a while, you hit a thistle or a thorn that was in with the potato, and then you get that too. So this is my favorite farm job. But did you know that there is a chemical in the soil, in dirt, a pheromone in the dirt that when it goes inside our noses causes happiness? It causes oxytocin release. Totally true. Sniffing dirt makes you happy. And I do not sniff any more dirt any other time on the farm than on my hands and knees digging taters. I love it. Okay? It makes me happy. Now, it's tricky because if rain comes when the potatoes are ready to harvest and we don't get them all out of the ground, they rot and you lose the crop, which is thousands of dollars. We had that happen a couple years ago. This is not laid back. But for my money, it is some of the best days I have ever had in my life. I love the feeling of being one with the land, of knowing it intimately with my body, of knowing exactly what happened every single day in the life of my potato, of tasting that little bit of dirt that is still on it when I eat it 4 hours after it came out of the ground. That's the real romance of farming. The mythos of the landed gentry tells us that living close to the land should be easy and comfortable and convenient, but that is not farming. Okay, myth number 2. A simple kind of life never did me no harm. The idea here is that farm life is simple, even simplistic. How many of us would admit that our culture, through the way we manage money and the way we treat our food, devalues and thinks that farming is simple, even simplistic? Anybody could do that. Oh, come on, I grew some stuff in my backyard, right? We treat farm people also culturally as if they were less intelligent and less sophisticated than city people, right? Somehow less advanced. But anyone who thinks that farming is simple, and heaven forbid simplistic, knows absolutely nothing about the complexity of farm ecosystems and habitat stewardship that is required to manage a piece of land in a healthy way. It is impossible to overstate the complexity of intersecting life forms that make up a farm ecosystem. Migratory sandhill cranes that stop in our neighbor's pasture and consume huge amounts of insects. Eagles and hawks and owls that regulate the rabbits and skunks and mice and small critters on our farm. Many species of woodpeckers, some of which it's very hard to see in other places, right? Innumerable songbirds, deer, wild hogs, a pack of coyotes that manages part of our ecosystem, snakes, lizards. One day, some of you have heard me tell this story. One day I came home from my city job and Tracy said, "I got something to show you." Like, "What'd you find today, honey?" He said, "I found a snake skin." I was like, "Well, so what?" Because, they drop from the rafters onto our heads. Literally, we've had black snakes drop on our heads periodically. He's like, "No, you want to see this snake skin." I'm standing in the kitchen, and he comes in with a 5.5-foot long timber rattler skin. I was like, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. Where did you find it? Up in the barn. Apparently, and I did a little research, a fully mature timber rattler can grow to 6 feet. So we apparently had a fully mature timber rattler keeping the mice and the rats population under control in the barn. which is cool. Modern living arrangements, those of suburban and urban housing developments, the ones that are highlighted in cottagecore stories and in the myths of the landed gentry, those kinds of living arrangements are designed to provide convenience and comfort and ease for the human part of the system, usually at the expense of the rest of the ecosystem. These kinds of living arrangements are not designed for the sustainability of a complex ecosystem, for a wide range of many varied life forms. So on the farm, we need a large red wasp population because they pollinate some of our crops, particularly the purple hull peas, which is a traditional Tennessee food. So when I'm harvesting purple hull peas, I'm doing it surrounded and swarmed by red wasps, the stings of which, I've only had one in all the years, the stings of which are completely cured by a salve made from the wild plants that grow next to the purple hull pea field. The mosquitoes that swarm around the gardens are food for the martins that live in the martin gourds over the garden. The fruit flies break down the compost, and I will tell you that on a market gardening farm, you have a lot of compost, a lot of veggie compost. Even the ticks are absolutely essential food for the wild turkeys that come through multiple times a year. Everything has a role. Nothing is out of place. And understanding that is at the core of living in harmony with the land, which you're stewarding, particularly if you're doing it in an organic way. So here's an ecosystem story that Tracy tells me about. It's about learning how foolish we can be when we try to exploit the land for our own gain, and about how brilliant the land is in restoring itself despite our foolishness. So on his old farm, Tracy had a number of big ponds. That farm was 500 acres. Our current farm is 163 acres, but his previous farm was 500. Lots of ponds. He discovered that one of the ponds was a great place to raise ducks and duck eggs. Sounds very idyllic, doesn't it? Right? Little ducks swimming around. Now, he had a customer in Knoxville, here in town, who bought the duck eggs, and she purchased large quantities of them to sell in Asian markets in Knoxville. Tracy, being a businessman, said, that's a great opportunity. So he set about raising an unnaturally large number of ducks for duck eggs on the pond, which went fine for a while, until one day he pulled up with his pickup truck, and the ducks were, it's hilarious to watch Tracy tell this story because he's like, the ducks were all like this looking at the pond. You know, they look out the sides of their eyes, right? The ducks were all looking at the pond and like, we're not going in there, ain't happening. Nuh-uh. And he walks up to the pond, and the pond was writhing. The surface of the pond was writhing. Now, what, I ask you, do you suppose, decided to migrate to a pond filled with ducks who dropped some of their eggs in the pond? Snakes. Thousands of them. Snakes, because they eat ducks and they eat duck eggs. Tracy's duck pond was now full of snakes. Fortunately, as he will tell you over and over again, nature will achieve a balance. So pretty soon, a couple things happened. First, the snakes ran out of duck eggs to eat because the ducks were no longer swimming on the pond and dropping their eggs into the pond, right? So that's going to impact the snake population. Second, coyotes ate all the spare ducks who were around the pond because they didn't want to go in the pond because there were too many snakes. So the coyotes took care of that problem. And then there were largemouth bass in the bottom of the pond who like to eat baby snakes. So the ecosystem worked itself out. And Tracy, thinking he was the master of that ecosystem, learned a lesson. This year we gave up on raising laying hens because we are losing money selling pasture-raised eggs. We did supplement our hens some with a little bit of organic corn. So the hens were out on pasture, they laid a lot of eggs, they got a little bit of corn as supplement. But we could not make anywhere near a profit selling those eggs, right? Because chicken houses, the egg houses sell you your eggs. We don't even gonna go into how they do it, for a ridiculously low price. So when the hens went away, the rats that had been living out near the barn decided to look for food elsewhere. So they headed to the house. They moved into the crawl space under the house, ate through the closet floor, and tried to nest in my piano. And I mean that. I came face to face with a Norway rat poking her head out of the back of my piano. That problem took a few weeks to manage. But that was our fault, because we hadn't factored into the equation of removing the laying hens, the rest of the ecosystem that was out there with them. It's not simple and it's not simplistic. And I'm really glad of that I have the luxury of living in a complex ecosystem, which is extremely inconvenient in many ways. Okay, last myth. City folk driving in a black limousine, a lot of sad people thinking that's mighty keen. So the myth here is that different kinds of people live in the city and in the country. Anybody remember City Mouse, Country Mouse from your childhood, the story of the city mouse in the country? Yeah, it's one we know, right? Right? But don't we all need to know something about where our food comes from and where the wood that builds our houses comes from? In what world does any one of us live without the resources that come directly from the land? There's not one of us that lives separate from that. Now, the truth is that until probably, I'm going to say about 50 or 60 years ago, most people, even in more urban environments, grew some of their own food, or they knew the people who grew the food. Tracy's papa brought food from his farm in Hardin Valley into town, where it was sold at Cass Walker's store. Everybody know who Cass Walker is? The guy who discovered Dolly, who's kin to Tracy, actually, right? So Papa brought his truck. It would take a couple days, whether it was, the wagon or the truck, right? They'd come into town and they would sell food at Cass Walker's store. So people who got food in the city still got it from local farmers. In recent times, that has changed. Two trends have taken over. First, our food comes from very, very, very far away. And second, people with city jobs are now living in the farmland in the country. Living truly off the land means that you produce food, shelter, heat and clothing maybe, from the land you live on. That's hard for most farmers these days. But 100 years ago, for the most part, people who lived in the country were producers of what they needed for their own survival, got what they couldn't get from their neighbors, and most of the people who lived in town got it from their neighbors as well. That is not true anymore. People who live in the city and in the country now are forced to live very city-style lives. Most modern people, particularly people living not on the farm or in a rural environment, most people produce things that aren't food, shelter, heat, and clothing. They produce services. They produce intellectual property. They produce materials or objects related to consumption, frequently related to some form of play or entertainment or intellectual activity. We are largely consumers of the things that we need to actually survive, right? Most of us, and this was true of me before moving to the farm, could not begin to provide for our own survival if we had to. I have said many times, the biggest lesson the first year on the farm for me was how much labor it takes to produce enough food to feed one person for 1 year. It takes a year of labor, because conservation of energy, super oversimplification, but But it takes as many calories to produce the food for you to burn calories as it takes for you to burn them. So I got to work for a year to grow enough food to feed me to work for the next year. We make goods or services which we trade for money and then purchase our survival needs from a rapidly diminishing group of people who produce the things we need for survival. So that one step away from your survival kind of living, that's always been more typical in highly densely packed urban areas, but it has steadily migrated to the country. We are, in fact, experiencing a massive gentrification of farmland. Up until fairly recent times, 100 years or so, those who could live a step away from the work of survival from the land while occupying rural spaces, so that landed gentry group, those were people who were mainly really wealthy or nobility, right? Royalty. Even our so-called founding fathers were landed gentry. They relied on chattel slavery to do the actual work of producing survival from the land. Indentured servitude, chattel slavery, prison labor, those are just some of the ways, some of the systems that have supported comfortable, easy, cheap resource attainment, right? Now, COVID has had an enormous impact on farm culture. Huge. Since COVID, many city people have not just the wealth, but also the convenience to live in the country while having their job in the city, right? They live on the farm and they shop at Walmart, and this is devastating our ability to produce the foods we need. Here's why. Once COVID hit, lots of people started working remotely, okay? Which means that people with big city salaries have the ability to now work most of the time without having to commute, and they can work out in the country. So my neighborhood has seen, my area has seen dozens of big farms that were in production when we moved there 8 years ago, that now the prime fertile soil of those lands are filled with little 5 to 10 acre parcels that have a McMansion sitting in the middle of them. Little garden, maybe a goat or a sheep. This is often referred to by farmers who farm for a living as hobby farming. And our current economy has made that very possible. And you might say, well, that's really nice, and I agree. I would love for more people to be able to live close to the land, but here's the problem. City salaries way outpace the kind of money that farmers have by orders of magnitude, right? Because we've devalued the work of farming. Because it's simple and easy and laid back. And we resist paying farmers living wages because we can get it cheaper in ways that are done that harm the earth. But those landed gentry have driven the cost of farmland up so astronomically that people who know how to tend those ecosystems are being driven off that land because they cannot financially afford to be there. We are currently exploring the possibility of putting our farm, if we can get Tracy's family to agree to it, into permanent agricultural easement so that it has to be used in perpetuity for traditional purposes. We don't know if we'll be able to do that or not, though. People who live primarily by consuming are taking up all the land that was once used for producing the basic survival needs of life, which means that the people who know how to do that production are being lost and forgetting it. That intelligence, that incredible wisdom is being lost. Here's some statistics for you. In 1981, about 30% of the fruit consumed in the U.S. was imported from other countries. In 2023, that number had gone up to 60%. 60% of our fruit comes from other countries. Anybody got any idea where the bulk of our applesauce in the U.S. comes from? China. The vast majority of the applesauce you buy in the grocery stores here in the U.S. is imported from China. That's our primary supplier of applesauce. In 1981, only 3% of the vegetables eaten in the U.S. came from other countries. Now that is 40% of our vegetables come from other countries. Someone recently asked me about the quality of our food supply, because one of the primary arguments is, well, it's really good to diversify our diets, right? Yes and no. Here's the catch about that. It's a cost-benefit thing. The reason we need, where do we get our potassium, everyone? Bananas. Why? Good answer, Yetta. Yetta said kale, right? The reason that everybody thinks we need bananas to supplement our potassium is because we've depleted our soil so badly that our potatoes and our other vegetables, which used to have plenty of potassium in them, our soil is so depleted that we can no longer get that nutrient from our soil. Okay? So if our land was treated well and not stripped of its nutritional value by unsustainable practices, which make it more convenient and cheap and easy, if we did more sustainable practices, our food would actually have the nutrients we need. And then that's happening all over the world, right? Here's some other scary statistics. Recent studies of farmland loss in Tennessee tell us this. 90,000 acres of farmland, which includes forest land being used for building things. 90,000 acres are converted each year into housing developments or commercial properties. That breaks down to about 1,300 farms per year. There are 69,000 farms left in Tennessee, and at that rate, we've got about 50 years left of farming in the state of Tennessee, if that just continues in that way. It's fueled in part by the gentrification of rural areas and partly by the drive to have what we want when we want it. The landed gentry myth looks like this. We want a really big house on a really big lot with no bugs and no snakes. We don't want to worry that our chihuahua is going to get eaten by a coyote when it goes out in the backyard. We don't want the yucky stuff. We want strawberries for Valentine's Day. Tracy literally had someone at the farmer's market ask him last week if he had okra yet. Okra's August. He has people say to him, "What do you mean I have to pull the strings off my green beans?" Without it occurring to them that little thing of green beans took us, probably for that little thing of green beans, 30 hours of labor in the heat, right? We're spoiled. I'm spoiled. I have a city job. I don't have to do it every single day. We are spoiled, and we're profoundly undereducated about the real and long-term costs of our comfort and convenience. When I moved to the farm, I thought I knew something about that, and I was clueless. All right, so any good preaching teacher would say, all right, now, you've made them listen to you. Go on, and it's a bummer. You got to give them some kind of up. Can't deliver a downer and expect them to go away liking you. So here's the good news. I'd like to see a show of hands of everyone in this room who eats. You have the power to change the world. How many of you wear clothes? Today, that's a good thing, right? How many of you live in a building that has wood in it? You have the power and the responsibility, we all do, to do something about this. I'm lucky. I am so privileged. I have the luxury of living close to the land. I have the luxury, and I have the incredible gift of a partner who knows how to do this, who still maintains the traditional knowledge and wisdom of generations and generations of people who lived on and in and with the land. Not everybody's going to have that, of course, right? But we all have the ability to be educated about where the things we consume come from. We all have the ability to advocate for sustainable production. We all have the ability to advocate for converting conventional farming methods into sustainable ones, right? We all have the ability to go to the farmer's market once in a while, even if it's inconvenient and a little bit more expensive. We can at least ask the question when we go to the store of where did that thing come from? We can ask these questions. Did this thing I am eating or drinking or wearing or sitting on or using or playing with, did it give life back to the ecosystem? Or did it just take from the ecosystem without contributing to it? Cow poop puts life back in the soil. Insects put life back in the soil. Snakes contribute. All the things that are in an ecosystem take and give. A lot of our supplies of things that we consume do not give back. So I would invite you to all start asking those questions. The world has huge problems. This isn't something we're going to fix today or tomorrow, but we all have the ability to make better choices. We can get our hands a little dirtier. We can have a little bit more respect for bugs and snakes. I know that's hard for some of us. We can love on our local farmers more. We're not going to go back to a primarily agrarian society, not without some serious societal collapse, which is not off the table currently, right? That's not off the table. But we can shift from the fantasy of being landed gentry to the reality of what it takes to produce the things we need to survive. It takes work, it takes effort, it's messy, it takes discomfort and challenges, and it is the single best thing I can imagine. I cannot imagine going back to not knowing where my potato came from. I cannot imagine it. The way that that has fed my soul and my sense of hope and my belief in the possibility of life, priceless. I wouldn't trade it for diamonds or jewels, ever. So I hope that some of you, in whatever ways you can, are able to think about that. When you take a bite of food, when you put on your clothes, when you drive through the country, our awareness is the first step. So thank you for listening to my annual speech on modern agriculture. Okay. Thank you. Now, okay. Anna and Bill get the prize of the day on justice and generosity related to this topic. Because before the service, they showed me this, which is the coolest thing ever. So this is a tag from a pair of jeans made from recycled bottles, okay, which I hear are very comfortable. So D jeans, and you said Hager too?
D jeans is women's, mostly women's, and Hager, H-A-G-G-E-R, is men's.
Okay. D jeans, women's, Hager, H-A-G-G-E-R, men's pants, jeans. You can buy your clothes that are made from recycled bottles. Big good thing, okay? There are so many justice and generosity opportunities out there to make a difference. Simple little things like that make a difference. You can contribute to Westside. We are doing good work. Our Green Sanctuary team is doing great work on these issues, right? We are doing things in all sorts of areas. I love it. Our current partner is the Bottom, and they are doing incredible work in the African American community. So there are all sorts of ways we can just little simple things in our lives, we can make a difference. One of the things we are going to be doing, starting again in April, that I just want to remind you of is we've agreed to be a helper church, a support church in Family Promise. The families aren't going to be coming here, but we're going to be helping the church they're going to. And we would really like someone who wants to coordinate those. It's 2 weeks out of the year. It's actually 2 days out of the year. It's 1 day in April and 1 day in October. And Elizabeth Corbett, our programs and membership coordinator, hearing me talk about sustainability and justice work last week, said, I need to do less. So So if someone is interested in helping to it's a simple job. It's literally just coordinating a few volunteers. Elizabeth will show you how to do that in April and then turn it over to you to do in October. It's probably just involves coordinating a few volunteers, a few phone calls with the host church. So we're looking for someone to do that. So if you're interested in that, please let me know. And again, you can contribute your time and your energy, or finances are very helpful. Pretty soon we'll be going into our annual Canvas campaign. The congregational meeting on March 30th, you'll get a chance to see the proposed budget, which we will vote on in May. So if you are relatively new to Westside and you're interested, you've been here going for a while and you're interested in actually becoming a member of Westside and are not one yet, when we have that luncheon next week, you can learn about that. If you join enough in advance of the May meeting, you will be eligible to vote on the budget at the May meeting, which we will be just giving you the draft of in March. So, lots of stuff to do, lots going on. I'm going to invite, I know it's cold and flu season, I'm going to invite you to stand for our closing. Hold hands if you like. Hold your own hands if you don't want to. You do not have to touch. I really mean it when I say that. You can hold your own hands. It's totally fine. Westside is a place where we strive to live into our values. We live in a society that is not ideal. If it were ideal, we wouldn't need to get together. But we get together because we are learning from each other how to grow more and more every day into values that we aspire to. So whatever it is that you can do this day or this week or this month, whatever simple little thing you can do to live into your values, I encourage you to do it with a full heart, with a little bit of ease in your mind, knowing that every little bit matters. Go in peace, go in passion, and please stay with us for coffee hour to enjoy a little bit of that food and fruit from the land that we enjoy when we're together. Have a wonderful week, everybody.